What's happening, financial coaches? It's Pete here. Hey, want to tell you the story about the Corvette and the trailer home. And this is a true story. I have to go way back in the archives for this, but it's something that I thought about actually talking to someone about trailer home investments, right? Mobile home investing. And one of the things that I flashed back to was that I grew up in Detroit in a not so affluent area. In fact, many of the people that I went to school with actually lived in mobile home parks. Trailer home isn't probably the right terminology for it, but you get the picture. These are manufactured homes. They usually sit on supports. They're usually not meant to be moved around, so they don't really have usually visible wheels. They kind of get wheeled around and moved from park to park on like a flatbed truck. But what ends up happening here is that when I was a kid, you would drive to go pick up your buddy, or your friends are picking up your buddy or whatever, and you drive through the trailer park and you would see all these brand new cars. And one of the things that I remember, and it still happens now, is that there will be usually some really nice cars in there, and maybe a lot of nice cars in there. And usually as you're driving through with people that don't live there, they will say things like, I don't understand why people live here and drive such nice cars. And I remember that, my buddy's family had a brand new Corvette. At the time it was the current model year Corvette, and they lived in this mobile home. And, a lot of people would kind of talk behind his back about it. Why not get a better home instead of driving such a fancy car? And, it's easy to judge people like that, especially when you don't live like that. And basically it revealed two things to me, but I kind of want to give you a little bit more detail about what goes on for people that might be living like that, and particularly in Detroit. So one of the things that I learned at that age was that because my friend, another friend of mine, actually worked for GM, and the friend that lived in that mobile home park also, his family worked for GM, I realized that, and being a kid, I didn't really understand this at the time, but there is employee pricing on cars when you work for an automaker. And the employee purchase plan, like the A plan or whatever it was called, was actually really, really good. And I kind of found out the details about this from my buddy who I was growing up with. His father worked for GM. And what ended up happening, I think it was like $79 a month. As an employee, you could lease any car you wanted from the GM stable for $79 a month. And so, that being said, my friend had a car while he was in high school. And his father had a GM, and his mother had a GM, and all these other things. But his father had the biggest Cadillac that they made. And actually, at the time, I think it was called the Sedan DeVille Brougham Edition or something like that. It was this huge Cadillac, but again, it was $79 a month. And my friend drove to high school in a Chevy Astro van. It was a very nice van, but it was also $79 a month. And I remember asking him, I said, well, if the employee plan allows you to get any car that you want, why does your dad get you a Camaro or a Corvette? And his answer was he just doesn't want me driving one of those. He thinks I'm going to kill myself. And it's probably a fair concern from a parent with a kid in high school, right, to have a high-powered sports car. But the reality is he could have gotten that. He could have had his son driving a Camaro or a nicer car or a luxury car or a Cadillac, right? He got him the Chevy Astro van to make sure that he would cool his jets and live a bit more responsibly. The nice thing about it was we were able to pack a lot of people in there, and we were able to have a lot of fun, and it was kind of like a mobile apartment, for us in high school. So I kind of learned that. And so when we would go to the mobile home park and pick up my buddy, it made more sense to me because his father worked at GM. And so that he had a Corvette, for probably $79 a month. He was able to lease a brand new Corvette, drive the car of his dreams, probably feel like $1 million when you're out on the road. And it probably wasn't that expensive to live in a mobile home park. And so overall, he probably wasn't spending maybe as much as the average person was, certainly on a car payment. Even most leases on a car like that would have been $200-300 a month back at this time. So the fact that he had a Corvette was probably just him maximizing what he was allowed to do under that plan, and in no way was kind of worthy of anyone's judgment about how he's spending money. In fact, he could have probably had, a Chevy Beretta at the time, which probably would have paid $79 a month for. It would have probably been worth 1/3 of the car that he was driving. And so why have a less valuable car, a less impressive, a less fun car for the same money? It probably doesn't make sense. And so he was probably making a wise financial decision given the constraints that he had, right? And so I bring this up because even today, and the issue was just the other day, I was driving with some people. We were driving by a mobile home park, and as you drove by, there were a lot of nice cars, and there were some comments about why do these people have such nice cars and live in such tiny homes? Why don't they upgrade their home? And it was the same thing I had heard back 20 years ago when I was in my own neighborhood. And at the time, I would have said the exact same thing. But as we're driving by, I would kind of flash back to that moment when I would have had some judgment. And that was the first tendency is the tendency for us to judge other people based on the optics, based on the appearances. And I don't know that I feel ashamed about it, but now that I have more information, I totally understand why they did what they did. Now, I don't know anything about the people that live there, but I think it's really easy to judge anyone, right? It's really easy to judge, certainly, a nice car in a mobile home uh, lot. It's certainly easy to judge the person that lives in the big house and drives a beater. It's certainly easy to judge someone who drives a fairly mundane car and doesn't drive a luxury car, yet they have a really good title at their company or whatever it is, right? It's very easy for us to judge other people. But the second thing about this is the big reveal is that it is a lesson for us to not apply our personal values to things. So the reality is, would I live in a mobile home park? I certainly would. I really don't care where I live. I have lived in some very small apartments. In fact, I can tell you a story about how my first apartment was more of a garageman. It was kind of an illegal apartment built in a standalone garage in a separated garage in the city of Chicago, and it was just super cheap. And it's a place I could hang my hat and fit my budget, and probably would not be legal today. Probably would not be something you would ever find on Craigslist, but at the time it was something that I stumbled into and lived at. I totally didn't mind. As my father said, it beats camping, and I love camping. So I just don't really care where I live. I'm not into necessarily having like a big house or a luxury apartment or any of that stuff. I just don't really care about that kind of stuff. For me, there are other things that are more important. I like to travel. I like to see the world. There's some things I collect, whatever it might be. Right. So we all have our own priorities. Now, I do live in a home, and part of that is because, my wife doesn't share exactly the same values that I have. And so we have to split the difference a little bit. But what I'm saying here is that just because you value more space and big rooms and a nice basement, doesn't mean everyone does, right? And maybe their value is to drive a nice car. Maybe that's their dream, just to have a nice car, and they don't really care about where they live. Especially in the FI community, a lot of people that have achieved their level of FI do it by downsizing, and sometimes that is going against the grain, and sometimes they get called out for, why do you drive such an old used car, such a beat up car? Why do you live so far out in the country? Why do you live in such a rural or remote area? And the reason is because, hey, if I can buy a house in cash and I don't have any debt there, and I didn't lay out a lot of money, I didn't use my entire net worth to buy that house. If I can get rid of a financed $30,000 car, $40,000 car, and buy a $4,000 used car in cash, that gets me around, that allows me to maybe have job freedom, right? Be able to work any job I want without having to worry about the compensation. Maybe it allows me to just live off my assets, whatever it might be, right? And so this again is applying personal values to other people's situation. And it's a good place for us to, one, step back and say, hey, I don't know what the situation is, or maybe I do know what the situation is, but I'm not going to necessarily judge it. And I'm not necessarily going to overlay my personal values on their life, assuming that we share exactly the same priorities, right? They may share different priorities. They may be totally happy. They may be able to afford the house that you live in, or maybe have more assets than you. And they are just making decisions based on their life that, give them the elements that they want, right? Allow them to prioritize the things that are most important to them. So that's my story about the Corvette in the mobile home parking lot. And I just wanted to share that with you so that maybe it helps you, when you see something that might seem amiss, but it might have more detail underneath or behind the scenes that you're not aware of. So hopefully that helps. I'll see you later.